Yup, there we go.
I recreated Spider-Verse on my own for $0, and you can too. The trilogy has been estimated to cost around $400 million, so I wanted to see what I could do with the power of Blender and the help of a couple hundred tutorials. My goal is to recreate this scene from Into the Spider-Verse without spending a single dollar. In order to prepare, I watched several making of videos from Wired and Insider. After examining them closely to see how the lighting and compositing of the movie works, let me break it down for you. As most of you know by now, Spider-Verse uses Ben-Day dots to replicate old printing patterns in the highlights and hatching in the shadows. I've been trying to recreate this look now for years. It started when I wanted to make a short film that featured a Spider-Verse styled section, and what I ended up with was alright. But now we can see what mistakes I made back then and how we can improve upon them now. When I first started, my immediate thought was just to give everything a texture that follows along with the camera instead of the UV map. But as you will see now, it doesn't look terrible, but it's not great. So what I ended up using was a node setup in the compositor of Blender that is extremely rough but works for the most part. I'll leave a link down in the description if you want to see that. For this video, however, I'll be using a much more advanced and refined node setup in Blender 4.3 done by Pau Hans. This setup is by far better than anything I've seen before.
No joke, animation takes very long, man. And they have like a team too, so that can help them out. If you're doing this by yourself, it's gonna take millennials, my G.
And it works pretty universally on any scene. It also has this wonderful depth of field look that the Spider-Verse movies have. If you are not a fan of this, I would highly recommend checking out Fred for today's video on how he tackled the challenge. And while we're on the subject, I'd also like to mention this fan animation done by Ronim. This animation is far better than any fan animation I've seen in this style. However, he does use Nuke and a couple of other expensive programs for compositing. And this video only uses Blender. Alright, now that we have our lighting finished, what about models? As you saw in the original video I made, I used this Spider-Man model done by just a guy uploading model no one cares about. Yeah, that's his username on Sketchfab. I don't know why. Regardless, it was a great model and it had pretty good textures. But what I wanted to see if I could do is push the Spider-Verse look by having a little bit more stylization. For instance, I wanted the webbing on his suit to be more sensitive to light than other parts of the suit. Being a bit of a Blender noob, I decided that I used a black and white mask of the suit that I made. Then I used a mix node with the original suit to give the effect that the webbing was more sensitive to light than the rest of the suit. This is why you see it look a little bit weird at times. Luckily for you, I found a better tutorial which uses the same model, same textures, same concept, just executed better. This is done by Ego Motion, which I'll link in the description. Okay, so now that we've covered how to make a shader setup for Peter Parker, what about Miles Morales? After all, he is the main character. Well, I have you covered. After going deep into the depths of ArtStation and Gumroad, I found this amazing model, which thanks to P1USHII is completely free. I genuinely have no idea how he isn't charging money or has a Gumroad for this model. Anyways, he has 3 versions uploaded. Each one is extremely well done and he has an advanced shader and texture setup for each style. But this brings us to a bit of a predicament though. Should I use a shader setup on my 3D model or should I use the compositing shader? Well, I have the solution. Just make a separate render layer by going up here, disable everything except the lighting and the character, then go into your compositor and make this node setup at the very end. Okay, so basically, this is where the end of my normal compositor ends, so it's like that, then it goes right here. Just bring this, plug it into a mix shader, my bad, a mix color, not a shader. And then, what you want to do is Shift A, render layers, grab that, change it to Miles, that's what I named it. That's the scene with only Miles. Bring the image down here, bring the alpha right here. This essentially separates them from any compositing shading while keeping all of their personal shaders enabled. I learned this technique from an extremely well done tutorial by Nisharks on his Spider-Verse video. If you prefer to use textures over compositors, I'd highly recommend checking out his 2 videos that he made. Alright, we have an animation rig, a compositor setup. Now all we need to do is the animation and the city. Let's start with the city. This is maybe the most subjective part of the video, as it's almost all up to preference now. You can either model every part of the city yourself, or download free assets off Sketchfab. Or you can do what I did. I have a subscription to a service called Cargo, which gives me access to a bunch of free assets each month. However, since I want everyone to be able to do this for completely free, I have a link to a bunch of free building models in the description that I used in my original video. This may be the only part of the video where I consider this cheating, as I'm spending a bit of money, but it's not really necessary as you can get equally good models for free or model them yourself. Regardless, I made a very simple scene using a couple buildings and one intersection. Something else I'd highly recommend is using these big white blocks to cast some shadows, as they can enhance the atmosphere and give the illusion of more buildings in the scene. Finally, make sure you add some mailboxes and traffic lights to really sell the fact that people live here. I then moved on to lighting. Since this scene is set at golden hour, the lighting in the sky caused me a bit of trouble. Let me break down what I did. but the easiest one of them is to just select all of your keyframes, go to pose, animation, and then bake keyframes. Now you want to set this to 2, and then press bake. Then you go back and set all of your keyframes to constant. Thank you guys so much for watching. Obviously my version was not nearly as good as the movies, but it was a worthy attempt. And I'm sure you guys can do better than me, so at me or comment down below if you make something. Anyways, just make sure you give proper credit to anything you use in the description, and I'll see y'all later.
Actually.